In 2019, a 27-year-old graphic designer named Ethan Keller signed a 12-month lease for a small rental house on Maplewood Street, just outside of Boston. The house was built in 1942, 960 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, no basement, at least according to the listing. The landlord, Marianne Briggs, was a quiet woman in her late 60s. She showed Ethan the place in less than 5 minutes. No small talk, no disclosures, just paperwork. Ethan didn't care. The rent was cheap, $840 a month, which was almost suspiciously low for that area. On move-in day, Ethan noticed something odd. Every room had a thin, beige carpet, except the living room. That one was a darker, thicker material, newer, almost too new for the rest of the house. He didn't think much of it, not yet. The first week, Ethan kept hearing small noises in the living room. Not rats, not pipes, just tap, like something lightly touching wood from underneath. He ignored it. Old houses make sounds. On day 9, while vacuuming, the machine bumped against the leg of the sofa and shifted it a few inches. The carpet folded slightly, revealing a perfectly straight seam along the floorboards. Ethan knelt down and tugged at the carpet. It wasn't stapled, just glued, cheaply. When he peeled it back, he found a square cutout in the hardwood, about 3 feet by 3 feet, heavy wood, with no handle, no hinges, just a hatch. That evening, he called Marianne, the landlord. She didn't pick up. He left a message. "Hey, did you know there's a trapdoor under the carpet? Should I be concerned?" No response. The next morning, out of curiosity, Ethan pressed down on the hatch. It didn't budge. So he slid a flathead screwdriver into the seam and leveraged his entire body weight. It finally gave in with a dry, cracking sound, like wood separating that hasn't been opened in years. Cold, dusty air rushed out. Not moldy, just stale, like a cellar that had never been ventilated. He grabbed a flashlight. The hatch led to a staircase, 11 steps made of unfinished wood. Underneath, dirt floor. No concrete, no utilities. Nothing that indicated the house was ever meant to have a basement. The beam of his flashlight shook slightly as he scanned the walls. On the left side were rusted metal hooks, spaced about a foot apart, not enough for coats, more like restraints. On the right side, a long, narrow shelf nailed directly into the studs. Something was on it, small objects that looked handmade. He aimed the flashlight. They were toys, carved out of wood, poorly sanded, splintered. Little cars, little animals. A small man with no face. Ethan tensed. He had never seen toys like that, not in stores, not in flea markets. They looked like someone made them because they didn't have access to anything else. When he turned back toward the stairwell, he noticed something in the dirt. Footprints, bare footprints, small ones, recently made. To recently. Ethan felt his ribs tighten. He backed up the stairs, shut the hatch, pulled the carpet over it, and pushed the sofa back onto it. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Marianne finally returned his call. Her voice was shaky, like she already knew what the conversation was about. "You found it, didn't you?" she said. Ethan asked. "Found what?" There was a long pause. Then she said, "I had a son once. He liked to play down there. Please, don't open it again." Before Ethan could ask anything else, she hung up. 2 days later, Ethan came home from work at 6:14 p.m. He immediately noticed 2 things. The sofa wasn't aligned with the rug. The carpet in the living room had been pulled back. The hatch was open. Dust was scattered on the floor. Fresh dust. The kind that only kicks up when someone climbs stairs that haven't been used in years. The light in the living room was off. But from the hatch, Ethan heard it, breathing. Slow, heavy breathing. Not panicked. Not startled. Just waiting. Ethan stood at the edge of the hatch, frozen. The breathing from below was steady, deliberate. He flicked the light switch on the wall. Nothing. The basement had no wiring, no bulbs, no sockets, which meant whoever was down there was comfortable in the dark. Ethan grabbed his phone, turned on the flashlight, and crouched, trying to see further down. The breathing stopped. Then a voice floated up, barely audible. It wasn't a whisper. It was humming, A simple, two-tone melody, repetitive, almost like a lullaby. Ethan's stomach tightened. Children hum like that. Adults don't. He dialed 911, but hesitated before pressing call. What would he even say? There's someone in a basement that doesn't officially exist. He pressed call anyway. While the phone rang, he noticed something else. Footprints. Not just the ones in the dirt below, new ones. Dirt footprints on his hardwood floor. Small, bare, leading from the hatch to the hallway. The dispatcher answered. 911. What's your emergency? Ethan's voice cracked. There's someone in my house, in a basement that shouldn't be there. Before she could reply, something moved in the hallway. He turned. A small silhouette stood by the bathroom door, 4.5 feet tall at most, skin pale, ribs visible, arms thin, hair shaved unevenly, eyes wide, not in fear, in focus, like an animal assessing distance. The dispatcher repeated, "Sir, are you in danger?" The kid didn't run. He didn't speak. He just stared at Ethan with the kind of stillness that didn't feel human. Ethan whispered into the phone, I think so." The kid turned and sprinted down the hallway, faster than Ethan expected. Disappearing through the open hatch, the breathing resumed below, louder now to sets. One calm, one panicked out. Then it stopped again. Police arrived at 6:42 p.m. 2 officers entered. One stood outside. Ethan explained everything. They exchanged looks, not dismissive, but annoyed. Basement trespassing cases usually meant vagrants or junkies. Officer Daniels lifted the hatch and shined his tactical light down. Jesus, what the hell is this? Officer Ruiz followed. They descended the 11 wooden steps, slowly. Ethan stayed at the top, listening. For almost 5 minutes, there was silence. Then Ruiz shouted, "We need backup, and a mask." Daniels called up, "Don't come down here." Ethan didn't move. Backup arrived. Fire department too. Paramedics. Neighbors gathered across the street at 7:11 p.m. Ruiz emerged from the hatch, pale and sweating. When Ethan asked what they found, Ruiz said, "Ask your landlord." Marianne, the landlord, arrived 20 minutes later. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't look inside the house. She went straight to the hatch and stared at it, hands shaking. Daniels approached her. "We need access to records about the previous tenants." Marianne sighed. There were no tenants, not before him. Daniel stopped writing. "So who lived here?" She didn't answer. Paramedics brought up 2 stretchers, both covered, both very small. Ethan's knees buckled. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. As officers taped off the living room, Ethan noticed something else in the dirt footprints on his floor. Each print had the same defect. The left big toe was missing, not just from one set, from both. 3 days later, Marianne was arrested, not for murder, not for neglect, for kidnapping. Specifically, 2 children reported missing between 1997 and 2004. The boys were brothers, taken from a playground in Providence, Rhode Island. They were 5 and 6 years old. When they vanished, the official report claimed they never resurfaced, but they did, right under Maplewood Street. The case blew up in local media, but one detail never made it into the news. The autopsy. Both boys were identified. Both died decades apart. One in 2009, the other in 2019, which meant one of them stayed alive down there for almost 22 years. And the detail that disturbed the coroner most wasn't the malnutrition. It was dental work. Someone had been filing their teeth consistently, carefully, for years. When Ethan asked the lead investigator why someone would do that to children, the man shrugged and said, "Probably because someone wanted them quiet." And here's the part that nobody could explain. Only one boy was ever removed alive from that basement, but there were 2 sets of fresh footprints on Ethan's floor that night. Both missing the left big toe, both heading out of the hatch. Only one ever came back down. In the weeks following Marianne Briggs' arrest, the Maplewood house became the center of a full forensic investigation. The basement was excavated. Walls were scanned. Soil was sifted through by hand, searching for bones, clothing, or anything organic. They found none. The public assumed both boys had been found, but investigators knew the truth. Only one body was removed, and it belonged to the younger brother, Liam Harris. Age at death, 11. The older brother, Noah, remained unaccounted for. The timeline painted a disturbing picture. Both boys were abducted in 1997 from a small playground in Providence. The parents were nearby. It was broad daylight. Witnesses remembered seeing an older woman offering the boys candy. Nobody thought much of it. Nobody ever saw the boys again. According to dental analysis, Noah was alive for at least 12 years after the abduction. That meant he reached adulthood underground. But the question wasn't how he survived. The question was, why keep him? Investigators dug into Marianne's background. She wasn't married. She never had biological children. But one thing stood out. Between 1976 and 1991, she worked as a nurse's aide at St. Raymond's Pediatric Hospital, a facility that later faced lawsuits over its handling of difficult children, kids with behavioral issues, neurological conditions, or developmental disorders. Former staff members described Marianne as strangely affectionate towards boys around 8 to 12, overly protective, possessive. She resigned abruptly in 1991 when the hospital was restructured. 6 years later, 2 boys vanished. It wasn't evidence, but it was a pattern. While sorting through boxes recovered from Marianne's attic, investigators found notebooks, not diaries, logs, not meticulous entries, written with a nurse's precision. Liam breakfast, 6:40 a.m., porridge plus vitamins. Noah fixed tooth, filet, lateral, incisor. Less noise now. Liam complained of cold. Boiler repaired. There were no dates, no years, just routines. But at the bottom of the box, under the notebooks, detectives found something stranger. Colon drawings, crude sketches. Charcoal on yellowed printer paper. Most depicted the basement. Hooks on one wall, toys on a shelf, stairs with a hatch above. But in 3 of the drawings, the boys weren't alone. In the corner of the dirt room sat a small metal cage, the kind used in pediatric behavior wards in the 70s and 80s. Inside was a child. No name, no face, just a cage. When detectives interviewed former co-workers from St. Raymond's Hospital, one detail finally surfaced. A retired nurse remembered a boy from the neuropsychiatric ward. Age 10, nonverbal, kept in isolation due to severe aggression. When she tried to recall his name, she struggled, but eventually whispered, Briggs. His last name was Briggs. Marianne's last name? The boy was never in any family records. No adoption, no birth certificate, but according to hospital logs, Marianne signed for his discharge the same year she resigned. After that, there was no trace of him. On paper, Marianne never had a son, but in reality, she did, and she raised him exactly the way she had been taught at the pediatric ward, hidden, isolated, controlled. That explained the toys, the baseline humming, the filed teeth, the cage, and it explained something else. Why the Harris brothers were taken. They weren't trophies, they were replacements. When Noah reached adulthood, Marianne no longer needed the younger one. Liam died sometime in 2009 from malnutrition and respiratory complications. But Noah, he survived, and here's where the case becomes unsettling. The forensic team concluded that the dirt, footprints in Ethan's living room, including the ones leading away from the hatch, belonged to someone. Barefoot, around 5 feet 7, male, and with an abnormal gait caused by a missing left big toe, exactly matching the older boy's profile, which meant the second boy didn't die in that basement. He escaped it. 3 months after the case closed, Ethan received a brown envelope in his mailbox. No sender. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Black and white, dated in the corner. 1997 it showed. Marianne sitting on a park bench. Next to her was a young boy about 10 years old, shaved head, thin wrists, vacant eyes. On the back of the photo, someone had written, he wasn't the first. For weeks after the Maplewood case disappeared from the news cycle, Ethan received a second envelope, just like the first one. Brown, unmarked, no stamp, no return address. But this one was heavier. Inside there were 3 items: a piece of grid paper, an address written in ink, and a small metal key with a tag that read 300 to the address was in Providence, Rhode Island, the same city where the Harris brothers were abducted 22 years earlier. That was too specific to be a coincidence. Ethan took a photo and sent it to the lead investigator. No response. Not for 3 days. By then, he had already bought a bus ticket. Providence was quieter than Ethan expected. Parts of it looked like postcards from the 1950s. Other parts looked like the kinds of places cities try to pretend don't exist. The address led to a 3-story brick building from the 1920s. No doorbell. No cameras. No name on the mailbox. The key fit the door on the 3rd floor. Inside, the apartment smelled like dust and old paper. There was almost no furniture, just a metal cot, an empty wardrobe, and a small children's plastic table, the kind you see in cheap daycare centers. On that table was a stack of rehabilitation cards, yellowed edges, faded ink, stamped by a medical institution, St. Raymond's Pediatric Hospital, Neuropsychiatric Unit, the same hospital. Marianne had worked at. Each card described a different child, age between 7 and 12. Diagnoses: nonverbal self-harm, aggression, social isolation, possible autism. At the bottom of every card was a signature. M. Briggs under. The stack was a single document folded in half. Ethan opened it. It was a discharge form. Name: Noah Briggs. Age 10. Status: discharged into home care year 1991. There was one problem. Noah Briggs did not exist in any state registry. No birth certificate, no school records, no social security number. He existed only inside institutions that didn't ask questions. Ethan pulled out his phone to photograph the paperwork, but froze when he heard something move in the hallway. A fast, scraping sound, like small nails across linoleum. When he stepped into the corridor, it was empty. Only the downstairs front door was gently swaying, as if someone had slipped out moments earlier. Outside, the air was cold and wet. Near the garbage bins, in the shallow puddles, were footprints. Bare footprints. One print was especially clear, missing the big toe on the left foot. When Ethan got back home, something was waiting for him. A 3rd envelope, heavier than the first 2. Inside was a simple handheld voice recorder, with one button. Ethan pressed it. At first, there was only breathing. Slow, steady breathing, like someone who hadn't spoken into a microphone in a long time. Then a male voice, quiet and unsteady, said, "You found my home. Now find the ones who took me from it." The recording stopped. Ethan gave the recorder to the police. They kept it for 5 days before calling him back. According to the audio lab, the breathing pattern and vocal characteristics matched the male, between 28 and 35 years old. Age range made sense. Noah would be 30-2. But the lab noticed something else. There was background noise during the breathing, not traffic, not wind. Typing. Slow, rhythmic typing on a mechanical keyboard, off to the left side of the microphone. That meant the recording wasn't made in a car, or on the street, or in an abandoned building. It was made at a desk. At a workplace. Police traced the rehabilitation cards found in the Providence apartment and learned that St. Raymond's Pediatric Hospital didn't just treat children, it also ran a behavioral research program between 1987 and 1995. The goal of the program was to test whether unmanageable children, nonverbal, aggressive, autistic, or traumatized could be conditioned into functioning adults through environmental control instead of medication. The program was funded by a private foundation. The same foundation later went bankrupt and dissolved, leaving no public records behind. When the hospital restructured in 1991, most of the children in the program were transferred to long-term care facilities, but not all of them. Some were quietly signed out to home care guardians. Guardians, like Marianne Briggs. Detectives found a list of 8 names who were discharged into private homes during that period. Of those 8, 3 were confirmed dead, 2 were institutionalized, 1 was adopted legally, and 2 were unaccounted for. No was one of the unaccounted. The second was a girl named Alina Price. She was 9 when she was reported missing. She had vanished from a playground in Providence in 1994. Her case had been closed as a family abduction, but her name was on the hospital's discharge list, and her guardian was listed as New Horizons Foundation, Remote Care Division, the same foundation that funded the behavioral program. At this point, the investigation hit a wall. Detectives needed warrants. The foundation no longer existed. Records were sealed. Legal jurisdiction was complicated, but Ethan wasn't bound by procedure. He did something police couldn't. He looked for Alina. She would be 35 now, too old to be on any missing children database, but young enough to still be alive. Ethan found an archived interview from a local paper in 2011. It featured a woman working as a transcriptionist for a biotech firm. Her name was Alina Price. The article didn't include video, just a photo, but the caption mentioned something unusual. Alina prefers to work barefoot due to childhood sensory aversion. When Ethan zoomed into the photo, he noticed something else. On her left foot, the big toe was missing.